Today I want to talk about what I consider huge news, and people are paying attention to it, which is that there was an agreement signed at the White House between Armenia and Azerbaijan, a peace treaty that was quote unquote brokered by Trump, and they named it the Trump route or whatever trip, okay? But I don't think that's important at all. There are implications to it, but let's discuss. This is the new world. This is what was agreed upon. The Trump route for international peace and prosperity, a trip. And you can see it goes from Baku over to Kars. But this route actually doesn't exist. And you can see that here, that the 166 kilometers, was that 100-mile railroad, still has to be built, and it ends up in Turkey. So Turkey has been an Azerbaijan supporter, and Armenia and Azerbaijan had a war, and Armenia was blown out of the water because Azerbaijan had the drones from Turkey, and it wasn't even close. And by the way, every military in the world from that moment on knew drones were big, and they started shipping them to Ukraine. And of course, now everybody in the world is talking drones, but this was the first battle, okay? Now, before the battle, this is what it looked like. Armenia had this enclave over here with the Stepanakert, okay, whatever that is, and that's where the Armenians lived inside Azerbaijan. And that yellow there, that was the corridor that Armenians could go back and forth between these two, between Armenia and this enclave inside Azerbaijan. That yellow was controlled by the Russians to keep the peace between the two and allow the two people to go. Obviously, this was blown away in the war. And if you know, there's no more enclave there, okay? So in this treaty that they just signed, they blew it away. So in other words, they set up a commission to study on how Armenia was going to get their people or keep them there or whatever. And this peace treaty says there is no Armenian enclave anymore. It's gone, okay? And Armenia signed off on it, but basically, remember something that we said about treaties. Treaties only make legal what's already happened. So Armenia had already lost, they were done, it was over, they couldn't do anything about it. And here's a picture from a few years ago of all the Armenians fleeing and going over to Armenia because, well, they lost the war. And people have called it genocide, people have called it ethnic cleansing. I have no clue, I'm just telling you what happened, that's it. So it's legitimate to ask, you go, okay, who cares, right? And by the way, we don't really care about these two. Now, there's gonna be a new supply chain there for energy from Baku over to Turkey. And if you look at all the pipelines, you know, Turkey is whatever you want to call it, a transfer country. So much comes in from Asia, they transfer it into Turkey, okay? Into Europe. So Turkey is an important person in world trade. And so what's happening here is now we're going to open up another route, and they indicate it's for energy, probably gas, I would imagine. So since they're in the White House and everyone's talking about this, what are we missing? Why is this far more important than what everyone's talking about? So as we know, Russia is the biggest country in the world, landmass-wise, okay? Now they only have 140-some million people, but what I want you to look at here is down in the Caucasus, you can see Georgia, you see Armenia, they don't have it there, and then you see Azerbaijan. Then you have all the stands over here. These are all countries that are under, we'll call it Russian influence. We won't say the thumb, but look at Kazakhstan before the Ukraine war. They had their strongman in Kazakhstan, and people were not happy. They were protesting and so forth. So the Russians sent in their paratroopers. They flew in at night. They killed a couple hundred people, arrested a couple thousand, put the guy back in, and then they left. This is the way Russia has to do it. Russia's army can't occupy all these countries. They need people in those countries to do their bidding, okay? And so that just gives you an example. So now with their armies all locked down into the Ukraine, the question that we've had for 3 years were, are these people going to be able to break away, right? And end the Russian Empire as we know it. Not end Russia, end the Russian Empire. So Russia knows all this, and Russia, over the years of being an empire, they decided there are 7 gaps or corridors that they need to control so they can be safe. And under the Soviet Union, they controlled all 9. They do not control all 9 here. And you can see here on the top here, they talk about where their gaps are and their challenge. And over here on the right at the top, they tell you everything about each one. And notice, numbers 6 and 7 are the Caucasus Black Sea and the Caucasus Caspian Sea. So you and I may not think a lot of this, but this is totally ingrained into the psyche of the Russian and the Russian military. This is critical. The reason they want the Ukraine, because on the other side of the Ukraine are 2 corridors and they want to control them. And you can see here that they already are losing control of some of their of the 9. They want them all back, okay? That is their end goal. Can they do it? Frankly, I don't think they can. You can stop and read this and you can see where they talk about how with the support of Turkey, it defeated the Armenians and they took out that little yellow thing that was the Russians, and then they named it the Trump Road. So think about what just happened here. You have I think there's 15 Soviet republics, okay, or Russian republics now, Soviet gone. And they just lost 1, if not, and 2, Armenia. And I started watching this about a month ago, and you can go back and look. In Georgia, some person was arrested by the Russians. They brought him into a police station, and in the news, they beat him to death. The Georgians went crazy. They then attacked the station, dragged out the Russians. They were beat, and I mean, they were beat. They saw the film of this, and they're determined to find out. My only point is, this would never happen if the Russians could react. They did not react. Now, Georgia today, there's now riots and protests and beatings and arrests and everything as the Russians are desperately trying to hold on, okay? But then you have Armenia and Azerbaijan, and guess what? They're no longer under the Russian military. Now, when you understand the 2 corridors, you can see why, notice, Armenia is not being discussed. But Azerbaijan, right, they're getting military aid. So think about something. The Russians were in control. This was Russia to control this area, okay? And guess what? Now they're buying military equipment from the Americans, including fighter jets. And they become a frontline partner on safeguarding energy corridors over to Turkey, all right? So here they are signing the peace deal, and they say we're going to stay. And in this peace treaty, they suspended Section 907, which said we couldn't sell arms to Azerbaijan because we are now selling them. And for the Armenians, they gave up all rights inside Azerbaijan to that Armenian enclave. It's gone. They signed it off. But I would say, remember something about treaties. Treaties only make legal what's already happened on the ground. The Armenians are already gone. They lost. It was over. So Armenia took the aid from Americans because that also severs them from the Russians, which is what they want. Now, I said in the beginning, this is a data point. The data point is this. Are the Russians going to lose control of the Russian countries that are under their control, like Kazakhstan and Armenia and so forth? And I would say they lost 2 and they're on the verge of losing another one. To me, this is very, very big news. This falls under our narrative that the Russian Empire could fall. Here's just another thing to see. What do you think? Like and follow, tell me in the comments.